A lot of EV charging conversations have been centered around infrastructure, sites, more power, more hardware, but that doesn't always translate into a better experience for the driver. On today's episode of Field Frequency, I'm joined by Seth Cutler, CEO of IONNA, a company that's scaling fast, but with a different thesis. If charging doesn't feel simple, consistent, and predictable, nothing else really matters. In this episode, we talk about the Rechargery model, why they're aiming to standardize pricing instead of complicating it, how their OEM partnerships are showing up directly for drivers in terms of value, and what it will take to build a network that drivers will choose. The next phase of EV adoption won't be one on hardware or software alone. It'll be one on an experience. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency, powered by Field Advantage, an IT field services company specializing in the maintenance and operation of critical infrastructure, including EV charging networks. Today, I'm joined by Seth Cutler, CEO of IONNA. Since the 2023 launch announcement, I believe it was, IONNA has had one of the fastest ramp-ups in the U.S. charging space, and with a port count exceeding, I believe, over 1,000. We've seen tremendous growth out of IONNA, and I'm excited to have Seth here today to share more. Seth, thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing some time. Before we get into all things IONNA, I'd like to just get a little background on you. If we could just hear, your career journey that led up to you leading IONNA. If you could just share some of your background, your role, and then like to get into the origin and kind of thesis for IONNA.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the e-mobility space going on probably about 14, 15 years now. So started my career with GE General Electric as an engineer, and then got involved back in like 2011, 2012 in EV charging back with GE. So we were making home chargers and L2 home chargers, L2 commercial chargers for workplace, hotel, etc. Went on from GE to join Electrify America early on. So I was the chief engineer at EA from 2017, employee number 12 or 13, to about the summer of 2019. So about 2.5 years, I was at EA on the early part of the build cycle and developing the tech stack for that. And then before IONNA, I was at EB Connect, where we did software for CPOs, for charge point operators, to support them as they rolled things out. So I've had an opportunity to kind of see all different life cycles of the sector, learned a lot, made a lot of failures, honestly, in the industry, like a lot of others. And I think that's kind of the genesis to why I really wanted to join IONNA and try to make things right in the industry and set the course electrification on a really good trajectory.
14 years is quite an accomplishment and not something many can say in such a nascent space. So you've been up and down the value chain, working with obviously a legacy CPO like EA, and then of course EV Connect is a well-known brand in the space. That's quite a journey and quite a testament to probably the institutional knowledge that you've gained along the way. Talk to us about IONNA. What's the thesis? Obviously, we know well backed by 7 legacy auto OEMs, but tell us kind of what was the thought process behind bringing that to market?
Yeah, so the OEMs really came together on this back in before even 2023, 2022 to rethink charging in the U.S. Charging has been the number one obstacle, honestly, from the adoption of EVs, and electrification from an infrastructure standpoint has struggled, honestly, in the United States with respect to reliability and charging experience, et cetera, and availability. So really the OEMs came together to say, hey, how do we rethink charging? I think there's been a lot of different puts and takes and programs and grants and other ways to support existing infrastructure providers. And they believed, based upon what they had done in Europe with IONNA, that the best chance was to build a joint venture for the 8 car companies to come together and say, hey, we're going to fund this thing and have influence over how it gets deployed and what gets deployed. And so I joined in 2024, in February of 2024, as employee number 1. And we built the company, basically it's been 26 months since we've started the company and got things rolling. And actually, the OEMs came together back in 2015, 2016 at an attempt to deploy a JV then. That's where IONNA got started in the US. And IONNA at that point didn't actually take shape. Volkswagen at that point had launched their Electrify America platform, and so we're kind of at it again this time. So I think it's a really wonderful opportunity for competitors, 8 competitors, to come together to say, hey, we're going to go solve a problem together for the benefit of everybody in the country.
You called out IONNA a moment ago. You mentioned that, and for those that are listening, might not be familiar with a CPO in the European market. What is the relationship maybe between IONNA and IONNITY?
Yeah, I mean, there's no actual
Okay,
relationship other than the fact that we share some of the same shareholders,
got it.
not all of them, but some of them, right? And there was a model for that in terms of, hey, in Europe, to your point, back in, I think it was 2016, 2017, some of the OEMs, some overlap, some don't, with IONNA, came together and say, hey, let's build a joint venture in Europe to deploy infrastructure across the continent. And so, they've had 7+ years of road time, so to speak, windshield time, so to speak, to build out a JV and see kind of how to go do this. And I think a lot of that went into, or some of that went into the original formation of IONNA.
So I think you guys, the Rechargery count has exceeded 1,000 ports. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So look, we've been in operation for, like I said, about 26 months now. Today we have 108 sites
Wow.
as of today, which is before this thing will actually go live. It'll be higher by the end of the month. And we have over 1,000 high power charging bays deployed. So everything that we deploy is what we call high power charging. So every charger is capable of 400 kilowatts. Every stall can go up to 400, and we power share to 200 kilowatts. So we're really trying to make sure that we're taking speed off the table in terms of charging speed,
Mhm.
and also taking charging quality off the table. So not just the fact that we deployed a high quantity count, but also the quality of what we deployed is pretty high. 35% of every one of our sites has a canopy
Mhm.
over the charging stations to provide protection for drivers and over the environment. 10% of what we've deployed, we've actually deployed our own amenities. So where we can't deploy with a partner for an amenity, we're actually building access to bathrooms, or building a driver lounge, et cetera, to make all that possible.
That's a game changer, and that's where I want to get off into the charging experience. Rechargery is the brand naming of all sites for ION.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yep.
So rechargeries, to your point about the canopies, the amenities, rechargeries have went beyond the transactional experience of, here's a site, maybe it's in a parking lot, 200-300 feet from maybe access to some type of retail experience, food, et cetera. Rechargeries seems to have gone beyond that. And there's a brand and an experience that is evident as one externally looking at it. There's brand and experience associated. So what brand or experience are you creating beyond just drivers having somewhere to plug in? And I think you've kind of already alluded to it with the canopies, but there's some thought there behind that. It looks like.
No, for sure. I think when we started to build a company, it was very clear for us that the world had changed. We like to joke around, like the world has changed over the charging, in the fact that in a lot of ways, the overall industry has gotten better from a specific charging quality standpoint. The days, 3, 4, 5 years ago, there were a lot more cars were getting stranded. They just couldn't charge. Payment applications would go down, or vehicle interoperability issues. And so a lot of that, not all of it, but you're seeing that perform a lot better in the industry as the whole industry gets better. Still a lot of work to be done. And obviously some networks perform better than others with respect to uptime and reliability, et cetera. What we wanted to really hone in on was, how do we up level the entire experience we have at the site, whether that's the labeling to make sure you understand which charger is available for you based upon the inlet on the vehicle, NACS for CCS. NACS has predominantly been a Tesla standard. Now it's being adopted by others, and CCS has been more of a legacy standard for non-Teslas. So how do we make sure the labeling is right? How do we make sure that every site has trash cans and windshield wiper cleaners and squeegees, so that you can take care of your car while you're charging, which has become commonplace in the gas station world? How do we make sure that there's access to bathrooms? And if we can't partner with a partner that has bathrooms, how do we go build them ourselves, right? How do we make sure we can go put up canopies where possible? Right? Like to have them everywhere. It's not always possible from a zoning or permitting standpoint, or from a timeline. So we haven't done it everywhere, but that's really the thesis that went into taking kind of this idea or theory of IONNA into reality with respect to taking care of that driver, and really putting the driver at the forefront of the decisions that we're making. And so we have 3 levels of product types that we put into the field. One is what we call a Rechargery relay. This is kind of the bare bones type site where you've got chargers. You may or may not have a canopy, and you probably won't have an anchor tenant, so to speak. You're probably going to be in a parking lot shared across a few different quick serve restaurants, or a couple of different gas stations, et cetera. Then the next step up is what we call a Rechargery. And this is a much fuller offering that we provide. And we'll either do that with a partner or without. And so with a partner, we've made announcements out Rechargeries at Circle K
Hmm.
or at Sheetz or at
Hmm.
Wawa or Casey's, et cetera. And that's a case where we're putting them in a parking lot, but tying it to a high premium retail partner. The other Rechargery is where we actually build our own amenity. So we've done this before multiple times where we've actually bought or leased old gas stations, converted them to 24/7 access, a driver lounge with vending machines, a place to sit, recharge yourself as you recharge your car, 24/7 access to bathrooms. And then the highest tier we have is what we call a beacon. And right now we have our first beacon in construction in California. It'll be 22 high power charging bays, full power. We're actually building our own C-store. So we're
Wow.
partnering with Amazon with their Just Walk Out technology, and we'll have outdoor seating with canopies over the seating area, et cetera. So really, we tried to think about, hey, how do we get to scale fast, which if you did everyone building a store, you wouldn't get there fast. You'd have a great experience, but you wouldn't be able to get there with speed.
Hmm.
And so what we've tried to do is say, how do we get to quality at scale? And that requires a bit of a tapestry approach of you've got different product mix and types of how we deploy in the field.
Beacon, that model of site, that sounds certainly compelling. You said 22 spaces, parking spaces.
Yep.
Wow, it's
Yep.
lot of energy. And then
Big site.
on-site retail. And is there some forecasts in terms of Beacon quantity throughout the U.S.? Are you targeting markets? Is this going to be a kind of East Coast West Coast thing, or will be some of those peppered throughout the Midwest and other?
It's a great question. I think we're still learning
Yeah.
from some of the stuff we're putting in the field to see what works, what doesn't, what really drives customers into some of these locations. How do we unlock electrification, adoption electrification?
Mhm.
So I think we've got some semblance of an initial strategy of how we want to see beacons roll out across the U.S. This first one will be a really good test for us and a lot of learnings, and we'll apply that to other sites. But we really deploy our sites into two main areas. One is along interstates. We call them corridors. The other one is inside of metropolitan areas, known as MSAs. And so 70% of what we're trying to deploy from an investment standpoint will be inside the cities, 30% across the corridors. And so you can imagine the higher end products, the beacons, these full scale rechargeries, we're intending to be inside of cities.
Mhm.
And so then using relays and partners to really fill in some of the gaps of the skeletal structure between these locations.
That's fascinating. It sounds like some of the strategy is going beyond. Okay, so I'm an EV driver. Sometimes, charging is easy. Of course, if I'm using a home charger, if I'm out moving around, need public charging, et cetera, it becomes something I have to do. It could be a burden, could be just something I need to make time for, et cetera. But it sounds like your vision and the vision behind is creating a destination rather than just something to have to stop and do. And so I would say messaging to the market for this is an invaluable resource that's, you're bringing to the EV community, this type of resource, whether you're looking at, Beacon level sites or anything, in between. That's, what is the thought behind, the vision behind the Beacon? Where do you tap into what the drivers are actually caring about, what they're wanting to, and how much is that pulled and extracted into the development of sites like the Beacon or the other types of sites that you've mentioned here?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think we definitely want to make sure that we're working with drivers and with the EV community to understand what the pain points are, and we did a lot of that early on. That's how we came to some of the conclusions that we came to and drove some of the product decisions and product archetypes that we deployed. We're continuing to do a lot more of that, right? So we use influencers, we use social media to
Mhm.
engage, we do focus groups, we do driver customer clinics where we actually bring people into our office at times, and we'll walk through things even down to the screen flows, understand how they interact with the stations, because we know
Oh.
based upon how those screen flows may go, it may cause people to have charging quality issues where they get confused about, do I plug in first? Do I pay first?
Mm.
What's the timeout? So we're very much trying to engage with drivers to drive decisions and understand specific pain points that we can alleviate to drive utilization, but more importantly, to take charging off the table as the reason why people don't want to buy EVs today.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Getting down to the granularity behind the process flow in interacting with the screen. Plug in first,
Yeah.
quad card swap first. Which one is it? All of that, and that is the recipe for a long time viability for sites. That's what's going to create that stickiness to the EV driver is the simplicity and the consistency experience. I imagine there's got to be some consistency. I would think that you probably want the driver that's having an experience in Texas to have a similar one in California, same on the East Coast.
Exactly. And it builds that familiarity, right? Where they know, hey, the idea being is, hey, when we build this thing at scales, we continue to grow it out. Because Today we're a network, I like to say, but we're not the network, and that's where we want to be, become the network of choice for consumers. And what I know success will look like is when someone drives on the highway, and either because they see it in the nav system or they see it on a sign, when they see IONNA, they have trust that that brand is there for them and they can charge their car and they'll have a great experience at the same time, right? That's what we're trying to build towards. And so to your point, we can't do that in a vacuum. We have to do that with the community, with the drivers, both current drivers, but also potential drivers. They're going to go make the conversion to electrification to make sure we're addressing their needs.
Yeah. Yeah, and the easy muscle memory to the experience is really important. You mentioned, the partnership that IONNA has with certain retailers, brands like Circle K, Casey's, et cetera. For the most part, the footprints of those retailers, their sites, I mean, it varies based on the location and where they're at, what markets they're in. But for the most part, their footprint is experience. If you've went to, enough of them, especially if you're used to traveling, you know where the bathrooms are, you know where the food are, you know where the drinks dispensers, where all that's at. And it's a common
Right.
experience. And so partnering with brands, I imagine that's part of the mission is as you are not really competing, but you are expecting to have some of that mind share with the EV driver as it's been informed with the maybe the experience they have on the ice side of their house with the vehicles that they drive that maybe aren't EV, or, you know, maybe they're new to EV and they're used to those experiences. So I can see where there's a need to have a commonality to the experience. So that's great. If drivers, well, it depends on the market. Obviously, they have options, and so I would say that the real world reasons behind someone choosing IONNA is of course the experience, but pricing and accessibility over complexity is important to EV drivers. And I've seen some very competitive pricing come out of IONNA. Charging pricing in some sectors, it can feel opaque and inconsistent depending on where you're at. And so it seems like IONNA's positioned around competitive kilowatt hour pricing and OEM linked programs. Could you maybe speak to that?
You know, yeah, for sure. I think it all goes back to we're looking at this holistically in the market,
Mhm.
and so we're trying to make sure that we can unlock this electrification piece. And so, to your point, we've seen pricing all over the map, both in terms of the business models, session fees and subscription rates, and pricing ranging all the way. I've seen 70 cents a kilowatt
Mhm.
hour for DC fast charging, which if you do, gasoline equivalency is extremely exorbitant, we'll say. And so we wanted to make sure that when we launched this thing, it was about the best value, right? Going back to the customer experience. So, we may not always be cheapest, but we'll be pretty close, or we will be if possible. But right now, all of our sites are at 39 cents a kilowatt hour or below.
Wow.
And so again, going back to consistency, how many networks today have a different price based upon a different zip code, based upon a different state, time of use, session fees, et cetera. And so we're trying to, we're exploring time of use, we're exploring different business models, but we're trying to make sure whatever we do has simplicity tied to it. So people aren't trying to download 18 different apps to figure out, which price they're going to get based upon whatever app they're using or time of day or it might be. And so that's one thing we say, we got to be simplistic how we do this. And we have to be the best value in the marketplace. That was number one. And you'll see us come out with, we're coming out with some ads as well about how, look, we've got subscription pricing without subscriptions, how we make sure we take care of the driver in a way that they can have, flexibility of choice at the right value. And then the second thing we're doing, and we rolled this out starting in March of this year, is starting to roll out discount programs with our investors. So GM was first to launch. GM driver today gets 10% off already best value pricing in the marketplace for being a driver of one of the investors inside of the IONNA JV. The next OEM will launch, in the next week or so, and the rest will start rolling out thereafter. So you're really trying to make sure that, again, we're creating this environment for folks where charging isn't the issue. Really, they can go out and go buy an EV and feel comfortable and trust in the brand and in what we're developing for consumers.
Without getting into too much detail, but for the listeners, so they understand what the value behind these programs. In other words, so I'm a new EV driver. I walked in, I just bought a GM. I bought whatever model of EV they have, and I now have specialized pricing. Or what's that program? Maybe if you, without getting too granular, but just to help the audience
Yeah,
understand what that value looks like.
that's great. So as a GM driver today, if you use the GM app to start a charge, either through the app or through auto charger plug and charge through the GM program, you automatically get 10%
Wow.
off of whatever the price is listed on the chargers. To my point before, all of our chargers are 39 cents or below. Now all of a sudden you're paying, 35, 36 cents a kilowatt hour. for that charge session without a subscription, just for being a GM driver using the GM ecosystem. And that same approach will roll out across all 8 OEMs this year.
Wow. It's a game changer. It's a game changer because, you mentioning a 39-cent average price, that is extremely good. It's very well priced. And there's been, obviously, from other sectors, other CPOs, some pushback on maybe, that higher price you alluded to earlier, 60, 65 cents, 70-cent kilowatt. And, there's been, from an industry perspective, there's been kind of more than one reaction. Obviously, the initial reaction is, wow, that's getting up close to gasoline prices when you look at what that will equal out to. But then others that are understanding it from the industry standpoint, oh, well, they've got to set that price point because they're trying to get that ROI moving forward from all the capex that went into building the site. But that pricing that you've said is average right now. That's compelling to the driver. Is there any concern that maybe today's pricing being as competitive it is within IONNA, that later, if there's a need to increase that, there could be maybe a market reaction from the drivers, or is it just, you're not worried about that?
Yeah, look, it's hard to peg what's going to happen, in the future in terms of inflation, inflationary forces, et cetera, or electricity prices. I think what we've been trying to do in everything that we do is be hyper focused on where we place our investments. Right, so every dollar we spend tries to go to a better experience for the customer at a site. And so because we run the business very efficiently, what we're able to do is try to pass that savings on to the drivers in terms of how we actually operate the business as well, in terms of keeping the price where we're keeping it. So I can't promise the prices won't ever change in the future.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is that we're going to always intend to be the best value for drivers in terms of the experience they're going to have and the price we're going to offer at those locations, right? So even though we're putting canopies in, even though every site is going to have a trash and window cleaning service with respect to, pick up the trash and maintain these sites. And even though we're putting in 24/7 access to bathrooms, what we're ensuring is we're still at a very reasonable price for consumers, and in most cases below where some of our competitors are. So again, best value is really the name of the game to continue to move the needle on EV adoption in the country.
Yeah. It's funny. I feel like you just answered a question I was fixing to ask you. And that was, drivers, obviously, they don't just want a charger. They want confidence in the experience. You alluded to the bathrooms, 24-hour access to bathrooms, trash can to offload trash from inside the vehicle, something to clean. All of these things are, I'm sure, embedded in the DNA of what you believe has to be true for someone to say Rechargeries are going to be my go-to charging network. There's got to be some other things maybe in there that maybe they're not appearing right now, and so you can't talk about them, but maybe there's something else on the roadmap. What do you think has to be true for someone to say that? That Rechargery is where I go exclusively. What's got to be true for that to be the case for an EV driver?
Yeah, look, for us, the model we use internally is quality at scale, right? We have to make sure that no matter what, we're delivering quality, charging experience, site experience quality. And then the second one is we have to deliver scale. Because if we're just a boutique or niche offering in just the state of Florida, for example, that's not a network. If I go buy an EV in Florida, where we've got a lot of sites, I got to know I can leave Florida and go somewhere else on a road trip, or I can go across the state. Same thing for any other state or any other location in the US. So quality at scale is very much in our DNA of what we're trying to go build. And that ties into a lot of other things that can then happen. How do you do integration to the OEMs, our partners, whether it's discounts or navigation or other things we might be working on in the near future. And then how do you think about what the experience at that site, irrespective of the charging piece, right? Because I think when we get to a place where people stop talking about the uptime of a charger or the uptime of a charging site, that the market's reached this next level or step function change of maturity. But in the electrification world, there's still so much dialogue on uptime or charging quality. We're trying to take that off the table. So people are talking more about the site, whether it's an IONNA site or IONNA amenity, or they're talking about the Wawa they went to because the charging just worked. I plugged it in, I charged, whatever, that's fine. By the way, I got a hoagie at the Wawa. Right? That's what we want people to be talking about, not about how good of a charging experience it was.
Well, the rapid growth, you mentioned it already. I've brought it up, the rapid growth in the last 26 months, over 100 sites, over 1,000 ports. As you expand, how are y'all keeping the experience consistent to get ahead of the fragmentation? And that question I'm asking because you may even you could even cite your personal experience over at EA, where previously, when you go to an EA site, you might have one brand of hardware at this site and one brand at the next, and maybe different payment processes or terminals or workflows, attached to the screen because it's different
Sure.
types of hardware. How's the vision set for avoiding fragmentation as a brand? Because consistency, muscle memory, all the thing we've talked about.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, right? Because I think that is always the complexity. And so we've intentionally and strategically started with one manufacturer of charging stations. It doesn't mean we won't expand outside of that. We're always evaluating the market, but for right now we've got one, which made things a bit easier in terms of that consistency. But what's good is because of how we're deepening our integration with our investors and our partners on the OEM side, we can make sure that irrespective of the hardware, plug and charge works the same way. People understand how to start a charge from the app. They understand how to use the credit card terminals, et cetera. So, what we want to make sure again is that just like when you go to any type of retail environment, when you step into insert retail partner here, what the experience you're going to get. That's exactly what we're building or trying to build at scale now with IONNA in terms of that experience. And so you'll see that in everything we do from, again, trash cans, squeegees, the labeling, the messaging, the integration piece at our locations.
As maybe 3 years from now, as you continue to expand, I mean, with the amount of growth that's happened just in the last 26 months, it appears to be a rocket ship moving forward. As you continue expanding, again, this is a question that's maybe broad brush, blank sheet of paper. What are some of the next things drivers might experience in a notable way over the next 2 to 3 years at a Rechargery site, whether it's a beacon or otherwise?
Yeah, I think the number one feedback we get from drivers right now is, can you build faster and come to our town, right? So I think what you're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years is we need to get to much more scale, right? California is a place right now. We've got 4 sites out of the 108 that are live. Only 4 of them are live right now. I think number 5 is going live today in California. So we want to make sure that we're more present in other locations across the country where we haven't been, and some of that's just the kind of the normal course of doing business in some parts of the country in terms of permitting and power. But we're trying to come there. So really, that'll be a big noticeable difference is continuing to grow scale at the same or faster rate going forward. Number one. Number two is what we want to make sure, right, is that as we continue to grow scale at the same rate or faster going forward, is that we maintain that quality. We've been diligent about quality, but as you grow, you got to make sure that you combat any growing pains. And every day we've got a team out hungry to make sure that we're taking care of drivers. And so that's the next thing is, as you see the scale, we're going to maintain that quality the whole time. And then the next piece, what that then leads to is once you've got scale and you've got quality and consistency is integration to the OEMs into the vehicles, right? And so you're starting to see that in this first phase of discounts. I think there's other phases we've got planned for later this year with the OEMs and with the car makers. And we've got a trajectory, kind of a multi-year trajectory after that, 2027 and beyond, in terms of how do you make sure that it's not just a charging network, it's really the strategic value proposition of the vehicle and the charging station. Because as you know, and as most people know that drive an EV, the experience you have at the charging station doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in concert with the car. And so that is the value of this strategic joint venture is, we do a lot of testing with the vehicles. We have a lot of conversations and integration with the OEMs with respect to different product teams and technical teams to make sure that as they're launching new products, new cars, new apps, we're part of that conversation early on in that planning process to make sure that we're thinking about the ecosystem, not just a singular piece of the charging station.
Yeah, that's so critical because there's been some false positives around charging sessions being incomplete, and it had to do with software updates on a particular vehicle and a disconnection there that a mass rollout of software that changed the way the charger and the vehicle communicated. It would signal to that would impact uptime at the charging site when really that's on the vehicle side. So I think that that ecosystem talking to one another is so valuable. It is so valuable. Well, it's been good conversation, Seth. Thank you for sharing these insights with us. I would say that I meant to look it up before we got online here. I want to say that 30,000 port counts was probably the goal when the announcement came out in 22, 23. Is that still a number on the board, or is site counter? What's some of the growth metrics that's on the target board?
Yeah, so it's all about the targets, right? Yeah, so our ambition is to be 30,000 charging bays by end of 2030 in that vicinity. And so that's what we're marching towards. I think we wanted to get to 1,000 bays live by our second year anniversary, essentially, and we just came within a few weeks of that. So we've got the trajectory that we need. We just announced our partnership with Circle K that both sides, them and us, are really excited about. That another, 50 sites that we're aiming to get deployed here over the next few years. So, we've built a really great pipeline of sites and bays across the United States. Working their way through permitting and construction right now, and so we've got goals in mind of what we think we need to be at to become the charging network that people can rely on. And so we're marching towards that and continuing to quicken the pace, so to speak, to get the quality at scale.
Well, Seth, I appreciate you sharing some time with the field frequency audience. For those that want to, keep up with what you're doing in the space, learn more about IONNA, what's the best channels and what's the methods to follow you?
Yeah, follow us on social media, and then on our website, hit the subscribe button and join our mailing list, email mailing list. We get emails out all the time, newsletters out to our drivers to keep them informed of what's going on.
Well, Seth, thank you for being on Field Frequency today. This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, AUTOZY.co.